The gunshot that echoed through the canyon was meant for Jack O'Malley's heart, but it only grazed his shoulder as he dove behind a boulder in the Nevada desert just outside Pahrump in the summer of 1882. Blood seeped through his shirt, staining the dusty fabric a dark crimson as he pressed his hand against the wound, his breath coming in ragged gasps while the outlaws who had ambushed him thundered past on their horses, apparently satisfied they had finished the job. He waited until the sound of hoofbeats faded into nothing before he staggered to his feet, his vision swimming as he tried to orient himself in the brutal afternoon heat that shimmered off the rocky terrain. Jack had been riding alone for 3 months now, ever since his brother died of fever in a camp outside Carson City, leaving him with nothing but a horse, a rifle, and a soul so heavy with grief he could barely stand upright most days. At 26 years old, he had seen more death than any man should, fought in range wars that left good people buried in unmarked graves, and watched the woman he thought he would marry run off with a silver mine owner who could give her silk dresses and a house with real glass windows. The loneliness had become his constant companion, more faithful than any friend, more present than any family member he had left in this world. His horse was gone, probably stolen by the men who shot him, which meant he was on foot in country that could kill a man in less than a day without water. Jack stumbled forward, each step sending fire through his shoulder, his mouth already dry as cotton despite the canteen he still had strapped to his belt. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, sage brush and scrub dotting the rusty earth, mountains rising in the distance like the jagged teeth of some ancient beast. He had maybe 4 hours before sundown, maybe less, and he knew that if he did not find shelter or help soon, the desert would claim him just as surely as that bullet would have. The sound reached him first, so faint he thought it might be his imagination playing tricks, a woman's voice carried on the hot wind. Jack stopped, swaying slightly, trying to pinpoint the direction. There it was again, definitely a voice speaking words he could not quite make out but with a rhythm that suggested prayer. He changed course, stumbling toward the sound, his boots sliding on loose gravel as he half walked, half fell down a shallow ravine. That was when he saw her, kneeling beside a covered wagon that had clearly seen better days, her dark hair falling loose around her shoulders as she pressed her hands together, her face tilted toward the sky. She wore a simple cotton dress that had once been blue but was now faded and stained with dust and travel, and even from a distance, Jack could see the tears streaming down her cheeks as she spoke to the heavens. "Please," she was saying, her voice breaking with desperation that cut through even his pain-fogged mind. "Please, I do not know what else to do. I have tried everything. I need help. I need a miracle. Please send me someone, anyone who can help us. I am begging you." Jack tried to call out, but his voice came out as barely a croak. He took another step forward and his boot crunched on a dry branch, the sound loud as a gunshot in the stillness. The woman's head snapped around, her eyes wide with fear as she scrambled to her feet, reaching for something beside the wagon wheel. Jack raised his good hand in what he hoped was a peaceful gesture. "Wait," he managed to say, his voice rough as sandpaper. "I am not here to hurt you. I am hurt myself." She stared at him, her hand still on what he could now see was an old shotgun, her face pale beneath the sunburn and dirt. She was young, maybe 22 or 23, with green eyes that held equal parts terror and determination. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, two desperate souls in the middle of nowhere, both clearly at the end of their respective ropes. "You are bleeding," she finally said, lowering the shotgun slightly. "Yes, madam," Jack replied, taking a careful step closer. "Got ambushed about 2 miles back. They took my horse. I heard you praying." Something shifted in her expression, a flicker of hope mixed with disbelief. "You heard me." "Hard not to," he said, attempting a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. "You were pretty loud." She set the shotgun down completely, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand, leaving streaks in the dust on her face. "I was praying for help, for someone to come, and then you appeared." "Maybe I am your answer," Jack said, the words coming out before he could think better of them. He swayed again, his vision darkening at the edges, and suddenly she was there, her small hands grabbing his good arm, trying to steady him despite the fact that he probably had 60 pounds on her. "Come on," she said, her voice taking on a note of authority that surprised him. "You need to sit down before you fall down. Come on, this way." She guided him to the shade of the wagon, easing him down onto a blanket that had been spread on the ground. Jack leaned back against the wagon wheel, breathing hard, watching as she rushed to grab a water skin and what looked like a medicine kit from inside the wagon. Up close, he could see the fine lines of strain around her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she worked, and he wondered what had brought her to this desperate place, praying alone in the desert. "I am Patricia," she said as she carefully peeled back his shirt to examine the wound. "Patricia Nelson. Everyone calls me Patty." "Jack O'Malley," he replied, hissing in pain as she pressed a damp cloth against the gash. "Most people just call me Jack." "Well, Jack, you are lucky. The bullet went clean through. Missed the bone, from what I can tell, though you have lost quite a bit of blood." She worked as she spoke, her movements efficient and practiced, cleaning the wound with a gentleness that seemed at odds with the strength in her voice. "I am going to have to stitch this. Do you have whiskey?" "Lost everything with my horse," he said through gritted teeth. "You?" She shook her head. "I have been out here for 3 days. We ran out of almost everything before then." Patty's face crumpled for just a moment before she regained control. "My father, he is in the wagon. He is sick, has been sick for 2 weeks now. Fever mostly, and he cannot keep anything down. That is why I was praying. I cannot move him on my own, and I cannot leave him to go for help. Our horse broke its leg yesterday, and I had to shoot it. I thought we were going to die out here." Jack looked at her with new understanding, seeing the exhaustion that went bone deep, the fear she was trying so hard to hide. "How old is your father?" 53. "He was strong as an ox before this, but the fever has taken everything out of him." She threaded a needle with steady hands, not looking at him. "This is going to hurt." "Most things do," Jack said, but he braced himself anyway. She worked quickly, her stitches small and neat, and Jack found himself watching her face instead of his shoulder, noting the way she bit her lower lip in concentration, the way a loose strand of hair kept falling across her cheek. When she finished, she wrapped the wound with clean strips of cloth torn from what looked like a petticoat, tying it off securely. "There," she said, sitting back on her heels. "That should hold, but you need to rest. You need to let your body recover." "So do you," Jack said, seeing the way she swayed slightly where she sat. "When did you last eat?" Patty looked away. "We have a little hardtack left, some beans. I have been giving most of it to my father, trying to keep his strength up." "That is not an answer." "Yesterday morning," she admitted quietly. "But I am fine. I am more worried about my father. I am worried about getting him to a doctor. Pahrump is only about 20 miles from here, but I cannot carry him that far, and even if I could, I do not know the way well enough to travel at night." Jack closed his eyes, thinking. 20 miles. In his current condition, that would take at least 2 days on foot, probably more. But if he went alone, left Patty and her father here, they might not have 2 days. And if he tried to help them both, he might not make it at all. The smart thing would be to cut his losses, head to town himself, send back help. The smart thing would be to save his own skin. But he had been alone for so long, and the look in Patty's eyes when she had seen him, that desperate hope, like he was the answer to a prayer, made something in his chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with his injury. "Let me see your father," he said, opening his eyes. "Let me see what we are dealing with." Hope flared in her face, bright and painful to look at. "Really? You will help us?" "I said maybe I was your answer," Jack replied, letting her help him to his feet. "Let us see if I can make good on that." The inside of the wagon was stifling, the canvas cover trapping the heat like an oven. A man lay on a makeshift bed of blankets, his face flushed with fever, his breathing shallow and rapid. He was unconscious, twitching occasionally, muttering words that made no sense. Jack pressed the back of his hand to the man's forehead and felt the heat radiating off him like a stove. "How long has he been like this?" Jack asked. "He stopped making sense 2 days ago," Patty said from behind him, her voice small. "Before that, he was talking, drinking water. But then the fever got worse, and now he barely wakes up." Jack examined the man as best he could in the dim light, checking for any obvious injuries or signs of what might be causing the illness. He found nothing, which could mean a dozen different things, none of them good. What he did know was that this man needed a doctor, needed medicine, needed things they did not have out here in the middle of the Nevada desert. "We need to get him to town," Jack said, backing out of the wagon. "Tonight, if possible." "But how? We do not have a horse." "I cannot pull the wagon myself," I tried. Jack looked around, taking in their situation with fresh eyes. The wagon was old but solid, the kind of thing that could be pulled by a single horse if the load was not too heavy. There was no horse, but there was a tongue and a harness, and there was him. It was crazy, probably impossible, but he had seen men do impossible things before when there was no other choice. "How much weight do you have in there?" he asked. Patty's eyes widened as she realized what he was suggesting. "No, no, you cannot. You are hurt, you have lost blood, you cannot possibly pull a wagon 20 miles. "Maybe not," Jack agreed. "But I can try. We can lighten the load, take only what we absolutely need. Your father, the water, whatever food you have left, leave everything else. And you can walk alongside, help push when we hit rough ground. It will be slow, but if we start now, walk through the night when it is cooler, we might make it by tomorrow afternoon." "You will kill yourself," she said flatly. "And then where will we be?" "At least alive, you might make it to town, send back help." "And how long would that take?" "Even if I left right now, pushed hard, I would not make it until tomorrow morning at the earliest. Then I would have to find help, convince someone to come back out here, hope I could find you again." "Your father might not have that long." Patty looked at her father, then back at Jack, her face a mask of indecision and fear. "Why would you do this? You do not even know us." It was a fair question, one Jack was not entirely sure he had a good answer for. Maybe it was because he had been alone for so long that the thought of leaving her here felt like a betrayal of something fundamental in himself. Maybe it was because he had seen too much death and could not stand the thought of walking away from people he might be able to save. Or maybe it was just that, when she had looked at him, when she had called him the answer to her prayer, something in him had woken up after months of sleepwalking through his life. "Because you need help," he said simply. "And I am here. And I think maybe we both need something to live for right now." She stared at him for a long moment, her green eyes searching his face for something, though he could not say what. Finally, she nodded, a single sharp jerk of her head. "Okay," she said. "Okay, tell me what to do." They worked quickly as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, stripping the wagon of everything they did not absolutely need. Patty's few possessions, her mother's china, books, extra clothes, all of it went into a pile by the side of the trail, abandoned to the desert. They kept the water, the food, blankets for her father, and the medicine kit. Jack rigged the harness as best he could, fashioning a sort of yoke that would distribute the weight across his shoulders and chest rather than putting all the strain on his injured side. By the time they were ready to move, the sun was a red ball balanced on the edge of the mountains, painting the desert in shades of orange and gold. Jack positioned himself between the wagon shafts, settling the yoke across his shoulders, feeling the weight settle onto him like a physical thing. It was heavy, heavier than he had hoped, but not impossible. Not yet. "Ready?" he asked, looking back at Patty. She stood beside the wagon, her hand resting on the side, her face set with determination. "Ready." Jack leaned forward, throwing his weight against the yoke, and the wagon groaned but did not move. He tried again, harder this time, his boots digging into the loose earth, his muscles screaming in protest. The wagon shifted, moved forward an inch, then another. "Push." He called to Patty, and he felt her weight join his, felt the wagon begin to roll, slowly at first, then with growing momentum as they hit a slight downslope. They were moving. The first hour was the hardest, Jack's body still weak from blood loss. His shoulder, a constant throb of pain that radiated down his arm with every step. But he pushed on, one foot in front of the other, focusing on the ground immediately in front of him rather than thinking about the 20 miles still to go. Patty walked beside the wagon, sometimes helping to push, sometimes running ahead to scout the terrain, warning him of rocks or holes that might catch the wheels. As the sun set and darkness fell over the desert, the temperature dropped mercifully, the brutal heat giving way to a cool that made the walking easier. Stars emerged overhead, so many of them that the sky seemed more light than dark, and Jack found himself falling into a rhythm, his breathing steady, his mind drifting. "Tell me about yourself," Patty said from beside him, breaking the silence that had stretched between them for the last mile. "Where are you from?" Jack was grateful for the distraction, for anything to take his mind off the burning in his muscles. "Originally, Missouri. Little town outside Kansas City. Left when I was 17, came west to make my fortune like everyone else. Did you make your fortune?" He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Not even close. Worked as a ranch hand, a guard for wagon trains, a deputy for about 6 months until the sheriff got killed and the town could not afford to keep me on. My brother and I tried our hand at prospecting for a while, but that was a bust. We were actually on our way to California when he took sick." "I am sorry," Patty said softly. "About your brother." "Yeah, me too." Jack was quiet for a moment, then asked, "What about you? What brings you and your father out here?" "We were trying to start over," she said, and he could hear the weight of old pain in her voice. "My mother died 2 years ago, influenza. After that, my father could not stand to stay in our town anymore. Too many memories," he said. "So we sold everything we had, bought that wagon and supplies, and headed west. We were going to try Oregon, maybe buy some land, start a farm. But then my father got sick somewhere in the Utah Territory, and we have been limping along ever since, trying to make it to the next town, the next doctor. No other family, no, it was always just the 3 of us. My mother could not have any more children after me." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick with unshed tears. "I cannot lose him too, I cannot be alone." "You are not alone right now," Jack said firmly. "And we are going to get him to a doctor. I promise you that." He did not know if it was a promise he could keep, but saying it seemed important, seemed like something she needed to hear. And maybe something he needed to say, to commit himself fully to this course of action, to give himself no choice but to succeed. They walked through the night, stopping only occasionally for Jack to rest and for Patty to check on her father. Each time they stopped, Jack could see the fear in her eyes, the way she would press her hand to her father's forehead, checking the fever, listening to his breathing. And each time, she would emerge from the wagon looking a little more frightened, a little more desperate. "He is getting worse," she said during one stop, her voice breaking. "He is burning up. I do not think he is going to make it until morning." Jack was sitting on the ground, his back against the wagon wheel, every muscle in his body on fire. He wanted nothing more than to close his eyes and sleep for a week, but he could hear the panic rising in Patty's voice, could see her starting to unravel. "Yes, he will," Jack said, pushing himself to his feet with a groan. "Because we are going to keep moving and we are going to get there." "How far do you think we have come?" Patty looked around at the landscape, barely visible in the starlight. "Maybe 8 miles, 10 at most. Then we are halfway there, maybe more. Come on, help me get moving again." She helped him back into the harness, and he could feel her hands shaking as she adjusted the straps. Without thinking, he reached back and caught her hand, squeezing it gently. "We are going to make it," he said, looking back at her. "All 3 of us, I promise." She squeezed back, and for just a moment, their eyes met in the darkness, and Jack felt something pass between them, some understanding or connection that went beyond words. Then she let go and stepped back, and they were moving again, the wagon wheels creaking in the silence. Dawn found them still walking, Jack operating on pure stubbornness now, his body long past the point of rational function. The landscape had begun to change, the flat desert giving way to rolling hills, and in the distance, he could see the smudge of buildings against the pale morning sky. Pahrump. They had made it, almost. "Look," Patty said, pointing. "The town. We can see the town." Jack nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The sight of those buildings seemed to give him a second wind, and he leaned harder into the yoke, the wagon picking up speed as they started down a gentle slope. Patty ran ahead, waving her arms at a figure she had spotted in the distance, someone on horseback heading in their direction. The rider, a man in his 50s with a sheriff's star pinned to his vest, took one look at their situation and immediately rode back toward town, returning minutes later with 2 other men and a fresh horse. They took over for Jack, hitching their horse to the wagon, and Jack felt his knees buckle as the weight came off his shoulders. Strong hands caught him, eased him to the ground. "Easy there, son," the sheriff said, his weather-beaten face concerned. "When is the last time you slept?" "Missouri," Jack muttered and heard Patty laugh, a slightly hysterical sound that told him she was close to the edge herself. "Get them both to Doc Henderson," the sheriff ordered, "and get that man in the wagon too. Move." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity that Jack barely registered. He was aware of being helped onto a horse, of riding into town with Patty beside him, of being half carried into a small house that smelled of carbolic and medicine. A doctor, an older man with kind eyes and gentle hands, examined his shoulder, making approving noises at Patty's stitchwork before rebandaging the wound and ordering him to drink something bitter that made his head swim. "Sleep," the doctor said. "You have earned it." Jack tried to protest, tried to ask about Patty's father, but exhaustion pulled him down like a riptide, and he was unconscious before his head hit the pillow. When he woke, the sun was streaming through a window and Patty was sitting in a chair beside his bed, her head tilted back against the wall, fast asleep. She had been cleaned up, her face scrubbed, her hair pulled back in a neat braid, and she wore a different dress, this one a simple brown calico that looked borrowed. In sleep, the lines of worry and fear were smoothed away, and Jack found himself staring at her, really looking at her for the first time. She was beautiful. Not in the flashy, painted way of the saloon girls or the pampered way of rich women in their silk dresses, but in a real, solid way that spoke of strength and determination, and a core of steel that would not break no matter what the world threw at it. She had walked beside him through the night, had pushed that wagon up hills and across rough ground, had never once complained or given up even when she had every reason to. She had trusted him, a stranger who had stumbled out of the desert bleeding and half dead, had put her life and her father's life in his hands based on nothing but a prayer and his word that he would help. And somewhere during that long night, somewhere between the desperate hours and the quiet conversations and the shared purpose of survival, Jack had started to care about her. Really care, in a way that went beyond simple compassion or the desire to help someone in need. He had started to want to know her, to hear her laugh, to see what she looked like when she was not afraid or exhausted or desperate. He had started to want things he had stopped letting himself want months ago, when he had decided that loneliness was safer than risking his heart again. As if sensing his gaze, Patty's eyes opened, and she sat up quickly, blinking in confusion before remembering where she was. When she saw he was awake, her face broke into a smile so bright it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "You are awake," she said, leaning forward. "How do you feel?" "Like I pulled a wagon 20 miles, Jack said, his voice rough from sleep. "How long was I out?" "Almost a full day. It is late afternoon now. The doctor said you needed rest more than anything, that you had pushed your body past any reasonable limit." She reached for a pitcher of water on the bedside table, pouring him a glass. "Here, drink this." Jack took the glass gratefully, draining it in a few long swallows. "Your father?" he asked. Patty's smile grew even wider, and tears spilled down her cheeks, but these were tears of joy rather than desperation. "He is going to be fine. The doctor said it was a severe infection, probably from something he ate, but with medicine and fluids and rest, he should recover completely. He woke up a few hours ago, clear-headed for the first time in days. He is weak, but he is going to live." The relief that flooded through Jack was so intense it made him dizzy. "That is good," he managed. "That is really good. It is more than good, it is a miracle." Patty wiped at her tears, laughing. "And it is all because of you. If you had not come along, if you had not helped us, my father would be dead and I probably would be too by now. You saved our lives, Jack." Jack did not know what to say to that, so he just reached out and took her hand, holding it gently. "You did your part too. You did not give up. That counts for a lot." They sat like that for a while, hands linked, not speaking, and Jack felt something settle in his chest, some piece of himself he had not realized was missing clicking back into place. When was the last time someone had looked at him the way Patty was looking at him now? Like he mattered, like he was worth something. When was the last time he had felt connected to another person, truly connected, not just in the physical sense but in the deeper way that made life feel like it had purpose? "The doctor says you need to stay off your feet for at least a few more days," Patty said eventually. "Your shoulder needs time to heal properly, and you need to regain your strength. He has offered to let you stay here in this room. He said it is the least he could do for someone who showed such courage and self-sacrifice." "That is generous of him," Jack said. "What about you and your father?" "There is a boarding house in town, run by a widow named Mrs. Fletcher. She has given us a room, said we could stay until my father is well enough to travel again. She is very kind. The whole town has been kind, actually. I think news of what you did spread pretty quickly." Jack felt his face heat. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Patty said firmly. "You did not. Most people would have kept walking, would have saved themselves and left us to our fate. But you stayed. You helped us even though it could have killed you. That is not what just anyone would do. That is what a good man does." Before Jack could respond to that, there was a knock on the door and the doctor entered, his face creasing into a smile when he saw Jack was awake. "Ah, good, you are up. "How are you feeling, young man?" "Sore," Jack admitted, "but alive. More than alive. You are going to make a full recovery, though I strongly advise against pulling any more wagons for the foreseeable future." The doctor moved to examine Jack's shoulder, unwrapping the bandage carefully. "The wound is healing nicely. Miss Nelson did excellent work. You were very lucky." "I know," Jack said, glancing at Patty. The doctor rebandaged the shoulder with fresh cloth, then stepped back, regarding Jack with an appraising look. "The town council has asked me to extend their thanks for what you did. In fact, they have taken up a collection to help compensate you for your trouble. It is not much, maybe $50, but they wanted you to know that your actions did not go unnoticed or unappreciated." $50. That was more money than Jack had seen in months, enough to buy supplies, a new horse, maybe even get himself set up somewhere. But as he looked at Patty, at the borrowed dress she wore and the exhaustion still visible in her eyes despite her joy at her father's recovery, he knew what he had to do. "That is very kind," Jack said carefully, "but I think that money would be better spent helping Miss Nelson and her father. They lost everything getting here, and they are going to need supplies and resources to get back on their feet." Patty's eyes went wide. "Jack, no. That money is yours. You earned it." "I did not do it for money," Jack said. "I did it because it was the right thing to do. You need it more than I do." "The young lady is right," the doctor said. "The money is yours. However, I think you will find that the town is more than willing to help both of you. There is already talk of putting together supplies for the Nelson family, helping them get resettled. Pahrump may be small, but we take care of our own, and anyone willing to risk their life for a stranger is one of our own as far as we are concerned." After the doctor left, Patty stayed for a while longer, talking about her father's progress, about the people she had met in town, about plans for what they might do next. Jack listened, enjoying the sound of her voice, the way she gestured with her hands when she got excited, the way she kept touching his arm unconsciously as she spoke, as if reassuring herself he was real. But eventually she had to leave, had to go check on her father, and Jack was left alone with his thoughts. He slept more over the next 2 days, his body recovering from the ordeal, his shoulder healing slowly but steadily. Patty visited every day, usually bringing food from Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house, sometimes just sitting and talking, telling him about her life before the West, about growing up in a small Ohio town, about her mother who had been a teacher and her father who had run a general store. "It was a good life," she said on the 3rd day, sitting in her usual chair beside his bed while he ate a bowl of stew she had brought. "Simple but good. I never wanted for anything important. Love, security, a sense of belonging. But after my mother died, it was like the color went out of everything. My father tried to keep going, tried to keep the store running, but his heart was not in it anymore. So when he suggested we sell and go west, start fresh somewhere new, I agreed. I thought maybe we could find that feeling again, that sense of home." "Did you?" Jack asked. "Find it?" Patty was quiet for a long moment. "I do not know. We have been running for so long, moving from place to place, that I have forgotten what home feels like. Maybe it is not a place at all. Maybe it is just being with the people you love, wherever that happens to be." "Maybe," Jack agreed. He set aside the empty bowl, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "What will you do now, once your father is well enough to travel?" "I do not know that either," she admitted. "My father talks about still going to Oregon, but I think the journey took more out of him than he wants to admit. The doctor suggested we might think about staying here in Pahrump, at least for a while. There is work to be had, the town is growing. Mrs. Fletcher even mentioned that she needs help running the boarding house, said she would be happy to have me if I wanted to stay." "Would you want to stay?" Patty looked at him, and there was something in her eyes that made Jack's heart beat faster. "I might, if I had a reason to." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken possibilities. Jack knew he should say something, knew this was a moment that required words, but for the life of him, he could not figure out what those words should be. He was a cowboy, a drifter, a man who had been alone so long he had forgotten how to reach out to another person. What could he possibly offer someone like Patty, someone who deserved stability and security and all the things he did not have? But before he could spiral too far into his own doubts, Patty spoke again, her voice soft but steady. "Jack, I know we have only known each other a few days. I know this is probably too soon, too fast, but I need to say something and I need you to listen without interrupting. Can you do that?" Jack nodded, his throat tight. "When I was kneeling beside that wagon, praying for help, I had given up hope. I really had. I thought my father was going to die and I was going to be alone in the world, and I did not know how I was going to survive that. And then you appeared, like you had been sent directly in answer to my prayer. At first, I thought it was just gratitude I felt, just relief at having help. But these past few days, talking to you, getting to know you, I have realized it is more than that. You make me feel safe. You make me feel like maybe I have not lost everything after all. And I know you are probably going to leave once you are healed, probably going to go back to whatever life you had before. But I needed you to know that meeting you, having you help us, it has meant more to me than I can possibly express." Jack stared at her, his heart pounding so hard he was sure she must be able to hear it. Everything in him wanted to reach out, to pull her close, to tell her that he was not going anywhere, that he had found something in her that he had been missing for so long he had forgotten it existed. But fear held him back. Fear that he was not good enough, that he would fail her somehow, that she deserved better than a broken-down cowboy with nothing to his name but a few dollars and a borrowed room. "Patty," he started, but she held up her hand. "You do not have to say anything," she said quickly. "I just needed you to know. Whatever you decide to do, wherever you decide to go, I will be grateful for what you did for us. Always." She stood up, smoothing her skirt, and moved toward the door. And Jack realized in that moment that if he let her walk out, if he did not say something right now, he was going to regret it for the rest of his life. He had been alone long enough. He had run from connection long enough. Maybe it was time to take a risk, to reach out and grab something good with both hands, even if it scared him. "Wait," he said, and she paused at the door, looking back. "I am not going anywhere." "What?" Jack pushed himself up to sitting, ignoring the twinge in his shoulder. "I am not going anywhere. Or rather, the only place I am going is wherever you are, if you will have me." Patty turned fully, her eyes wide. "Jack, what are you saying?" "I am saying that I have been alone for a long time, and I have been telling myself that I was fine with it, that it was easier that way. But then I found you, and for the first time in months, I remembered what it felt like to care about something other than just surviving. You said I make you feel safe. Well, you make me feel alive, and if you are staying in Pahrump, then so am I. If you will have me," he repeated. For a moment, she just stared at him, and Jack felt panic rise in his chest, wondering if he had misread everything, if he had just made a complete fool of himself. But then her face broke into that brilliant smile, and she was crossing the room in 3 quick steps, and then she was sitting on the edge of his bed, taking his hands in hers. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will have you, however I can have you." Jack lifted one hand to cup her face, his thumb brushing away the tears on her cheek. "I do not have much to offer you, no money to speak of, no land, no real prospects. But I can work hard and I can promise to always be honest with you, and I can promise that I will do everything in my power to make you happy. If that is enough." "It is more than enough," Patty whispered. "It is everything." And then she leaned in and kissed him, and Jack felt like he was falling and flying at the same time, like the world had suddenly rearranged itself into something better, brighter, more full of possibility than it had been just moments before. Her lips were soft and warm, and she tasted like hope and new beginnings, and Jack knew with absolute certainty that he had been right. He had been her answer, but she had been his too. They had saved each other. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Patty rested her forehead against his, her fingers tangled in his hair. "I think I am falling in love with you," she said softly. "I think I am already there," Jack replied, and it was the truest thing he had ever said. Over the next week, as Jack continued to recover and grow stronger, he and Patty spent every possible moment together. He met her father properly, a broad-shouldered man with kind eyes who was slowly regaining his strength, and who looked at Jack with a mixture of gratitude and approval that made Jack stand a little straighter. "You saved my life," Robert Nelson said, gripping Jack's hand firmly. "And my daughter's. I can never repay that debt." "There is no debt," Jack said. "I am just glad I could help." "Patty tells me you are planning to stay in Pahrump," Robert continued, his gaze sharp despite his recent illness. "That you have feelings for my daughter." Jack felt his face heat, but he met the older man's eyes steadily. "Yes, sir, I do. I know we have not known each other long, and I know I do not have much to offer, but I care about her a great deal." Robert studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I can see that. And I can see that she cares about you too. That is enough for me. Any man willing to risk his life for strangers, willing to work himself half to death to save people he does not even know, that is the kind of man I want in my daughter's life. You have my blessing, Jack. Whatever comes next, you have my blessing." The approval meant more to Jack than he would have expected, and he found himself blinking back sudden tears. "Thank you, sir. I will not let you down. I will not let her down." "I know you will not," Robert said, patting his shoulder gently. "Now, tell me about yourself. Patty says you worked as a deputy once." They talked for hours, and Jack found himself telling Robert things he had not talked about in years. His childhood in Missouri, his brother, his dreams of making something of himself in the West. Robert listened with genuine interest, occasionally asking questions, and by the time Jack finally took his leave, he felt like he had known the man for years rather than days. The town of Pahrump, as it turned out, was in need of a good deputy. The sheriff, the same man who had helped them that first morning, was getting older and found it increasingly difficult to handle all the duties alone. When he approached Jack about the position, offering a modest salary and a small house that came with the job, Jack accepted without hesitation. "It is not much," Sheriff William Garrett said, showing Jack around the small two-room cabin at the edge of town. "But it is solid, and it has a good roof, and the town council is willing to help fix it up, make it more livable." "It is perfect," Jack said, and meant it. He had lived in worse places, much worse, and the idea of having a home of his own, a place to build a life, felt like a gift he had not known to hope for. He started the job as soon as the doctor cleared him for work, spending his days making rounds through town, settling occasional disputes, keeping an eye out for trouble. It was good work, honest work, and Jack found himself settling into it with an ease that surprised him. Pahrump was a small town, but it was growing, drawing miners and ranchers and families looking for a fresh start, and there was always something that needed doing. In the evenings, he would have dinner with Patty and her father at the boarding house, or Patty would come to his cabin and they would cook together, talking and laughing and slowly learning each other in all the small ways that mattered. Jack learned that Patty was terrible at cooking meat, but could make the best biscuits he had ever tasted. She learned that he had a beautiful singing voice that he was shy about using, but that he would sing softly when he thought she was not paying attention. He learned that she was afraid of thunderstorms, a fear that dated back to childhood when lightning had struck their barn and killed their favorite horse. She learned that he was afraid of failing, of not being good enough, of letting down the people who depended on him. "You could never let me down," she told him one evening as they sat on the porch of his cabin, watching the sun set over the desert. "You have already given me more than I ever thought I would have again. Hope, a future, love." "I love you too," Jack said, pulling her close. "More than I thought I could love anyone." 6 months after they met, on a clear December day in 1882, Jack and Patty were married in the small church in Pahrump, with her father giving her away in half the town in attendance. Patty wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Fletcher had helped her sew, and Jack wore a new suit that the town council had given him as a wedding present. And when they said their vows, Jack's voice was strong and sure, with no trace of the doubt that had once plagued him. "I promise to love you and protect you for all the days of my life," he said, holding both her hands in his. "I promise to be the man you see when you look at me, to live up to the faith you had when you prayed for help, and I was the answer that came. I promise to build a life with you that is full of joy and purpose, and all the things we both deserve." Patty was crying, but smiling through her tears. "I promise to stand beside you always, to be your partner and your friend and your love. I promise to never stop being grateful that you found me that day, that you chose to help even when you could have walked away. I promise to build that life with you, to make a home wherever we are, to fill our days with laughter and our hearts with love." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Jack kissed her in front of everyone, there was not a dry eye in the church. Even the sheriff, a crusty old bachelor who claimed to have no time for romantic nonsense, was seen wiping at his eyes as they walked back down the aisle, hand in hand, grinning like fools. The town threw them a party at the saloon, which had been cleaned up and decorated for the occasion, and there was dancing and food and more well wishes than Jack could keep track of. Robert Nelson gave a toast that had everyone laughing and crying at the same time, talking about miracles and answered prayers, and the kind of courage it takes to risk everything for people you do not even know. "To Jack and Patty," he said, raising his glass. "May your life together be long and happy, and may you always remember that sometimes the greatest blessings come in the most unexpected packages." "Hear, hear." The crowd roared, and Jack felt Patty's hand tighten in his, felt her lean against him, and knew that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. They moved into the deputy's cabin together, and Patty immediately set about making it a home, adding curtains to the windows, putting flowers in jars, arranging their few possessions in ways that made the small space feel warm and welcoming. Jack built shelves for her books, a table where they could eat meals together, a bench for the porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the stars come out. Robert, fully recovered now and looking healthier than he had in years, decided to stay in Pahrump as well. He opened a small general store, using the money he had saved and some help from the town council, and it quickly became a gathering place for locals and travelers alike. He was happy, Jack could see, in a way he probably had not been since his wife died. He had purpose again, community again, and the joy of watching his daughter build a life with someone who truly loved her. The first year of their marriage was full of adjustments and learning and small joys that added up to something profound. Jack learned how to be a husband, how to share his space and his life with another person, how to communicate and compromise, and sometimes just admit when he was wrong. Patty learned the same things, and together they figured out how to navigate the challenges that came with building a life together. There were hard moments too. Times when Jack's past caught up with him, when men he had crossed paths with in his earlier days came through town, and he had to face them down. Times when Patty struggled with missing her mother, with wishing she could share this happiness with the woman who had raised her. Times when money was tight, and they had to make difficult choices about what they could afford. But they faced everything together, and somehow that made even the hard times bearable. In the spring of 1884, Patty told Jack she was pregnant. They were sitting at breakfast when she said it, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup, her face nervous and excited at the same time. "Are you sure?" Jack asked, his heart racing. "I am sure," she said. "The doctor confirmed it yesterday. We are going to have a baby, Jack. In October, he thinks." Jack stood up so fast he knocked over his chair, and then he was pulling Patty into his arms, lifting her off the ground and spinning her around while she laughed and told him to be careful. "We are going to have a baby," he repeated, his voice full of wonder. "We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Patty asked when he finally set her down. "Happy? Patty, I am terrified and thrilled and so completely in love with you right now that I cannot even find the words. Yes, I am happy. So happy." The pregnancy was relatively easy, though Patty had some morning sickness in the early months that made her miserable. Jack fussed over her constantly, trying to make sure she did not overdo it, bringing her ginger tea and crackers, rubbing her feet when they swelled. Robert was overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a grandfather, and Mrs. Fletcher and the other women in town organized themselves into a sort of support network, making sure Patty had everything she needed. In October, on a night when the desert air was finally starting to cool after the brutal summer heat, Patty went into labor. Jack stayed by her side through the whole ordeal, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, telling her how strong she was, how brave, how much he loved her. And when their son finally made his entrance into the world, healthy and squalling and perfect, Jack felt something in his chest expand so much he thought it might burst. "We have a son," he said, his voice choked with emotion as the doctor placed the tiny, red-faced bundle in his arms. "Patty, we have a son." Patty, exhausted but radiant, reached up to touch the baby's tiny hand. "He is perfect. What should we name him?" They had talked about names over the past months, throwing out possibilities, but had never quite settled on anything. Now, looking down at his son, Jack knew exactly what felt right. "Robert," he said, "after your father, if that is okay with you." Patty's eyes filled with tears. "Really, really. Your father gave us his blessing, gave us a chance to build this life. I cannot think of a better way to honor that than to name our son after him." "Robert O'Malley," Patty said, testing it out. "Bobby for short. I love it." When they told Robert Nelson that his grandson had been named after him, the older man cried openly, not bothering to hide his tears. "I am honored," he said, holding little Bobby carefully, marveling at the tiny fingers and toes. "I am so honored. And your mother would have been so proud, Patty. So proud of the woman you have become, the family you have built." Life with a baby was chaotic and exhausting and more wonderful than Jack could have imagined. He learned to change diapers and give bottles and function on almost no sleep. Patty bloomed as a mother, patient and loving even when Bobby was fussy or colicky or refusing to sleep. They took turns walking the floor with him at night, singing lullabies, telling him stories he was too young to understand but seemed to enjoy anyway. As Bobby grew, Jack found himself amazed by every little milestone. The first smile, the first laugh, the first time he rolled over on his own. Jack would sit and play with him for hours, making silly faces, reading books, teaching him to clap his hands. And every night after Bobby was asleep, Jack would hold Patty and marvel at the life they had built, at the fact that he was a husband and a father, that he had a family of his own. "Do you ever think about that day?" Patty asked one night as they sat on their porch, Bobby asleep inside, the desert stars bright overhead. "The day we met, all the time," Jack said. "How could I not? It was the day my life changed." "Mine too," she said softly. "I was so afraid that day. So sure that my father was going to die, that I was going to be alone. And then there you were, this stranger who said he might be my answer. And you were, Jack. You were the answer to every prayer I did not even know I was praying." Jack pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "You were mine too. I had been so lonely, so lost. I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life drifting from place to place, never belonging anywhere. And then I found you, and suddenly I had a reason to stay, a reason to build something lasting. You gave me a home, Patty. Not just a house, but a real home." "We gave each other that," she corrected gently. "We built it together." "Yeah," Jack agreed. "We did." 2 years later, their daughter was born, a healthy baby girl with Patty's green eyes and Jack's dark hair. They named her Mary, after Patty's mother. And Jack fell in love all over again, this time with a tiny person who had him completely wrapped around her finger from day one. Bobby, now a rambunctious toddler, was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help take care of her, to bring her toys, to make her laugh. Jack continued his work as deputy, and eventually, when Sheriff Garrett retired, Jack was asked to take over as sheriff. It was more responsibility, more pay, and a recognition of the respect he had earned in the community over the years. He accepted and threw himself into the work, determined to keep Pahrump safe, to make it the kind of place where families like his could thrive. Robert Nelson's store continued to do well, becoming one of the most successful businesses in town. He hired help as he got older, eventually training a young man to take over most of the day-to-day operations. But he still came in every day, still enjoyed talking to customers, still took pride in being part of the community. As the years passed, Jack and Patty's children grew. Bobby became a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and learning, who talked about becoming a doctor someday. Mary was wild and adventurous, always climbing trees and catching lizards and begging her father to teach her to ride horses. Jack taught them both to shoot, to survive in the desert, to value honesty and hard work and treating others with respect. Patty taught them to read and write, to value education, to be kind and compassionate, and to never judge people by appearances. They had challenges, of course. Years when drought made life hard, when food was scarce and everyone had to pull together to survive. Years when outlaws caused trouble and Jack had to risk his life to protect his town. Years when sickness swept through and they held their breath, praying their children would be spared. But they faced everything together, as a family, as a community, and somehow that made even the hardest times bearable. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jack took Patty back out into the desert, to the spot where they had first met. Someone had put up a small marker there, a simple wooden cross that travelers sometimes left offerings at, calling it the miracle place. Jack had always thought that was fitting. "Hard to believe it has been 10 years, Patty said, standing in the shade where her wagon had been that day. "It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once." "Best 10 years of my life," Jack said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "No question." "Mine too," she agreed, leaning back against him. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not found me that day? If you had taken a different route, or if I had been praying somewhere else?" "I try not to," Jack admitted. "It is too scary to think about, but I do think that maybe some things are meant to be. Maybe we were always supposed to find each other one way or another." Maybe I was your answer too, Patty said softly. Not just you being mine. Maybe we saved each other. Yeah, Jack said. I think we did. They stood there for a while, holding each other, looking out over the desert that had almost killed them both but had ultimately brought them together. And Jack felt such profound gratitude for the path his life had taken, for the choices he had made, for the woman he had chosen to build a life with. When they returned to town that evening, their children ran to meet them, Bobby and Mary both shouting about their day with Grandpa Robert, about the treats he had given them, about the stories he had told. Jack scooped Mary up with one arm, taking Bobby's hand with the other, and together the four of them walked home, a family in every sense of the word. Robert Nelson lived to see both his grandchildren graduate from school, to see Bobby head off to medical school in San Francisco with dreams of becoming a surgeon, to see Mary marry a kind young rancher and start a family of her own. He died peacefully in his sleep in 1898 at the age of 69, surrounded by the family he loved and the community he had helped build. At his funeral, half the town turned out, sharing stories of his kindness, his generosity, his unfailing good humor. He was a good man, Jack said in his eulogy, his arm around Patty, who was struggling to hold back tears. He raised an incredible daughter, built a successful business, and more than that, he knew how to love well. He knew how to make people feel valued and welcome. This town is better for having known him, and I am better for having called him family. We will miss him terribly, but we will honor his memory by living the way he taught us to live, with kindness, with courage, and with faith that even in our darkest moments, help can come from unexpected places. As Jack spoke, he caught Patty's eye, and she gave him a small, sad smile, squeezing his hand. They had been through so much together, built so much together, and even in grief, Jack felt grateful for the life they shared. Bobby graduated from medical school and returned to Pahrump to open a practice, bringing modern medicine to the town that had saved his parents' lives so many years before. Mary and her husband bought a ranch just outside town, raising cattle and children with equal dedication. Jack and Patty became grandparents themselves, marveling at the next generation, at the way their legacy was continuing and growing. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the town threw them a party, insisting on celebrating the couple who had become such an integral part of the community. There were speeches and toasts and a cake that Mrs. Fletcher, now in her 80s but still running the boarding house with an iron will, had baked herself. To Jack and Patty, the current mayor said, raising his glass, who have shown us all what it means to build a life together, to face challenges with courage and grace, to love well and deeply. This town is blessed to have you. Jack stood up, pulling Patty to her feet beside him. Thank you all for coming, for being part of our lives. When I stumbled into this town 25 years ago, bleeding and exhausted, I thought I was just trying to survive another day. I had no idea I was about to find everything I had been missing. Patty, you have made my life more beautiful and more meaningful than I ever thought possible. These past 25 years have been the greatest adventure I could have asked for, and I would not change a single moment. I love you more today than I did on our wedding day, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. Thank you for saying yes to that broken-down cowboy who showed up and said maybe he was your answer. Patty was crying openly now, but smiling through her tears. Thank you for being my answer, she said. Thank you for the life we have built, for our children and grandchildren, for every moment we have shared. I would do it all again in a heartbeat. They kissed to thunderous applause, and as Jack held his wife in his arms, surrounded by family and friends, in the town they had made their home, he felt such complete contentment that he almost could not believe it was real. This was his life. This was what he had found on that desperate day in the desert, when a lonely cowboy heard a woman praying for a miracle and decided to try to be the answer she needed. And what an answer it had been. Not just for her, but for him too. They had saved each other, built something lasting and beautiful together, created a family and a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. It was more than Jack had ever dreamed of, more than he had ever thought he deserved. But somehow, miraculously, it was his. As they grew older, Jack and Patty spent more time together, less time on work and more time on each other. They took long walks in the evenings, holding hands like they had when they were young. They sat on their porch and watched sunsets, counting their blessings, remembering their journey. Jack's hair turned gray, then white, and Patty's face gained lines that only made her more beautiful to him. They moved a little slower, ached a little more, but their love never diminished. If anything, it grew deeper, richer, more textured with all the years and experiences they had shared. On quiet nights, they would sometimes talk about that day they met, trying to remember every detail, every word, every feeling. It had become their origin story, the foundation of everything else, and they never tired of revisiting it. "I was so scared," Patty would say. "I really thought we were going to die." "I know," Jack would reply, "but you were also so brave, you never gave up, you kept fighting. Because you showed up, because you gave me hope." "We gave each other hope," Jack would correct. "That is what love does, it gives you something to fight for." They celebrated their 30th, 35th, and 40th anniversaries, each milestone feeling more precious than the last. They watched their grandchildren grow, attended school plays and graduations, bounced great-grandchildren on their knees. Bobby's practice flourished, and he became known throughout the region as one of the best doctors available. Mary and her husband expanded their ranch until it was one of the largest in Nevada, employing dozens of people, providing for dozens of families. The town of Pahrump grew too, from a dusty outpost to a thriving community with schools and churches and businesses. The railroad came through in the 1890s, bringing new opportunities, new people, new possibilities. Through it all, Jack and Patty were constants, pillars of the community, the couple everyone pointed to as an example of what true love looked like. Jack eventually retired from his position as sheriff, passing the badge to a younger man he had trained, but he stayed active in the community, helping where he could, advising when asked. Patty volunteered at the school, teaching reading to children whose parents could not afford books, and helped organize community events that brought people together. On a warm October evening in 1922, exactly 40 years after they had first met, Jack and Patty sat on their porch, wrapped in blankets despite the mild weather, watching the stars come out. They were both in their 60s now, both dealing with the various aches and pains of aging bodies, but still holding hands, still choosing each other every day. "Jack," Patty said softly, her head resting on his shoulder, "if you could go back, change anything about our life together, would you?" Jack thought about it for a moment, really considered the question. They had faced hardships, certainly. Times when money was tight, when they had worried about their children, when they had lost people they loved. There had been arguments and disagreements, moments of frustration and disappointment. But through it all, there had been love, constant and unwavering, the bedrock on which they had built everything else. "No," he said finally. "I would not change a thing. Every challenge made us stronger. Every hard moment led to something good. And I got to spend 40 years with you, got to build a family and a life that means something. How could I want to change that?" Patty squeezed his hand. "I feel the same way. Even the scary parts, even the sad parts, they all brought us here. And here is exactly where I want to be." "Me too," Jack said, pulling her closer. "Always and forever here with you." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the desert night, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of wind through sage brush. Inside the house, they could hear their great-granddaughter laughing at something Bobby's daughter had said during a family dinner they had just finished. The house was full of family, full of love, full of the kind of joy that comes from knowing you have built something lasting and good. "Do you think about heaven?" Patty asked suddenly. "About what comes after?" Jack nodded slowly. "Sometimes, especially now that we are getting older." "Why?" "I was just thinking that whatever heaven is, I hope it is something like this. Family, community, love that lasts. I cannot imagine anything better than what we have built here." "Except we would have your parents there," Jack added, "and my brother, all the people we have loved and lost. That would make it perfect." "Yes," Patty agreed. "That would make it perfect, but for now I am grateful for this. For every day I get to wake up next to you, for every sunset we watch together, for every moment we share. This is heaven enough for me." Jack pulled her close and kissed her forehead, feeling the same overwhelming gratitude that had been his constant companion for 40 years. He had been so lost when he found her, so alone and directionless, stumbling through the desert more dead than alive. And she had been desperate and afraid, praying for a miracle she did not really believe would come. But somehow, improbably, they had found each other at exactly the moment when they both needed to be found. They had become each other's answer, each other's miracle, each other's home. As the years continued to pass, Jack and Patty remained devoted to each other, to their family, and to the community they had helped build. When Patty's health began to fail in her late 60s, Jack became her primary caregiver, helping her with daily tasks, making sure she took her medicine, sitting by her bedside and reading to her when she was too tired to get up. And when Jack's heart began to give him trouble a few years later, Patty returned the favor, fussing over him, making him rest, reminding him that he was not the young man who had pulled a wagon 20 miles anymore. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by what seemed like half the town. Their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren all gathered to honor the couple who had shown them what enduring love looked like. There were tears and laughter and more stories than anyone could keep track of. And through it all, Jack and Patty sat hand in hand, smiling at each other with the kind of understanding that only comes from spending a lifetime together. 50 years, Bobby said in his toast, his voice thick with emotion. 50 years of marriage, of partnership, of love that never wavered. Mom, Dad, you have given us all such an incredible gift, not just the gift of life, but the gift of showing us how to live well, how to love deeply, how to build something that lasts. Thank you for being the foundation of this family, the example we all aspire to follow. Jack stood, somewhat shakily, leaning on his cane, and Patty rose beside him, holding his arm for support. They were old now, their bodies worn by time and use, but their spirits remained strong, their love as vibrant as ever. "Thank you all for being here," Jack said, his voice still strong despite his age. "Patty and I have been blessed beyond measure. We have been blessed with each other, with our children and their children, with a community that has supported us through good times and bad. When I was a young man, lost and alone in the desert, I could not have imagined that my life would turn out like this. I could not have imagined finding a love like this, building a family like this. But here we are, 50 years later, surrounded by proof that miracles do happen, that prayers do get answered, that sometimes the best things in life come when you least expect them. Patty, you are still my miracle. You are still my answer, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." Patty was crying now, as was most of the room. "And you are mine," she said. "Always and forever you are mine." They kissed, and the room erupted in applause, and Jack felt such profound peace that he almost could not bear it. This was what he had been meant to find. This was what his whole life had been leading toward. Not wealth or fame or adventure, but this simple, profound love, this family, this legacy of kindness and courage and faith. Jack and Patty lived several more years after that, each day a gift, each moment precious. They sat together on their porch, held hands through church services, attended family gatherings where they were treated like royalty. And when Patty finally passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 73, Jack held her hand and whispered his love, his gratitude, his promise that he would see her again soon. He lived 2 more years without her, years that felt empty despite being surrounded by family who loved him. He missed her constantly, missed her voice and her laugh, and the way she used to look at him like he was the only person in the world. But he also felt grateful for every moment they had shared, for the life they had built together, for the legacy they were leaving behind. On a quiet evening in autumn, sitting on the porch of the house they had made a home, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who had all come to visit, Jack closed his eyes and felt Patty's presence as clearly as if she were sitting beside him. He smiled, content, and whispered, "I am coming, sweetheart. Wait for me." And then he was gone, peacefully and painlessly, ready to rejoin the woman who had been his miracle, his answer, his everything. At Jack's funeral, the church was packed with people whose lives he had touched, whose families he had protected, whose community he had helped build. Bobby gave the eulogy, talking about his father's courage, his integrity, his unwavering love for Patty and his family. He talked about the day Jack had stumbled into the desert and found a woman praying for a miracle, about how Jack had said maybe he was her answer, and how that moment had changed all their lives. "My father and mother showed us what real love looks like," Bobby said, his voice breaking. "Not the easy kind of love that exists when everything is perfect, but the kind of love that endures through hardship and challenge and pain. The kind of love that chooses to show up every day, that works to build something lasting, that never gives up even when things are hard." They saved each other's lives that day in the desert, but they continued to save each other every day after that, simply by loving each other well. That is their legacy. That is what they leave behind, and we are all better for having known them. Jack was buried beside Patty in the cemetery on the hill overlooking Pahrump, the town they had called home for over 50 years. Their headstones were simple, bearing their names, dates, and a single inscription that Bobby had chosen. 2 souls who found each other in the desert and built a miracle together. The town erected a memorial in their honor in the town square, a bronze statue of a man and woman holding hands, looking out over the desert together. A plaque at the base told their story, about the lonely cowboy and the praying woman, about the miracle of love and courage and faith. It became a gathering place, a spot where couples would go to take pictures, where children would play, where people would sit and remember that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. Their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren continued to thrive in Pahrump and beyond, carrying forward the values Jack and Patty had instilled in them. Bobby's medical practice was eventually taken over by his own son, who had followed in his father's footsteps. Mary's ranch remained successful for generations, providing employment and stability for countless families. And the story of how Jack and Patty met, the tale of the prayer and the answer, was passed down through the family like a precious heirloom, a reminder that miracles do happen, that love does conquer all, that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply show up and try to help when someone needs you. And so, in the end, Jack O'Malley and Patricia Nelson left behind exactly what they had hoped to leave: a legacy of love, a family that knew how to weather storms together, a community that understood the value of compassion and courage, and a story that would inspire generations to come. They had found each other in the desert on a desperate day when both of them had needed a miracle, and they had spent the rest of their lives proving that sometimes, just sometimes, prayers really are answered, and lonely cowboys really do find exactly what they have been searching for. Their love story became legend in Pahrump, a testament to the power of faith, the importance of showing up when people need help, and the incredible things that can happen when two people choose to build a life together based on love, respect, and unwavering commitment to each other's happiness.